I'll just gonna wait for everybody to come in. A few housekeeping things. If you are not talking, please keep your mute on so that we don't have any feedback. And I'm so thankful so many of you are here today. And so this is the Generational Communications, and Stephanie Davis, who's with University HR Learning and Development, is going to lead the conversation today. And there's a lot of information to cover. So if you want to go ahead and use the chat box for questions, if you want something you don't want to forget, we will hopefully get to those at the end, but we may not take as long during the actual session to address questions. So without further ado, Stephanie, thank you so much for agreeing to talk with the CALS community today about generational styles and generational communication.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And I'm going to just jump right in because we have an hour and I want us to have an opportunity to share ideas about communicating with the different generations. And to do that, I'll be putting you in breakout rooms so that you can enjoy some conversations. All right, so I always love this cartoon because I think it absolutely explains exactly what we're going to be talking about today. If you read it, this may look familiar in your homes, your workplaces, but well, yes, we could read your blog, or you could just tell us about your school day. So obviously communication between generations in the workplace is absolutely critical, and it's more important than ever. It's also more challenging. If you think about it, many of us have grown up at different times of life. And of course, those events and things have shaped our way of thinking. For example, boomers came along during the time of the 1960s when we had a lot of turmoil. Millennials came along during the time of September 11th. And these types of experiences, both personally and nationally, shape who we are as individuals. They also impact our behavior, our communication preferences, and the way we interact with others. So, to make it even more complicated, we then have our newest generation, Gen Z, which is our students and those newest workers entering the workplace. And so more than ever, we need to really think about how to communicate together and strategies for improving that. So I'm going to show you a quick video that kind of depicts our different communication styles. We have a traditionalist speaking with a millennial. You may recognize this from the movie The Intern.
It's going to be a couple of interviews today, Ben. We want to make sure that we both find the right fit. Business as usual is not really our motto, so we hope you have some fun here. This is the first time we're hiring senior interns, so some of our intern questions may not exactly fit your profile, but we're going to go for it anyway, okay?
Fire away.
Okay, good. Where'd you go to school?
I went to Northwestern.
Hey, my brother went to Northwestern.
Probably not at the same time.
Probably not. He graduated in 2009.
Class of 65.
Wow. What was your major? Do you remember?
And after Northwestern, you went on to...
I went to work for Dex One.
Okay, and they made...
Phone books. I was in charge of overseeing the printing of the physical phone book. I did that for over 20 years. And before that, I was a VP of Sales and Advertising.
So, do they still make phone books? I mean, doesn't everyone just Google numbers?
I believe they do, but before Google, that was how you got it.
Oh, no, yeah, I get it.
So 40 years at the phone book company, that is amazing, seriously. Okay, Benjamin, now I'm gonna ask you one of our more telling questions for all of our interns, so I want you to this is the one to really think about, okay, and take your time. Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
When I'm 80.
Yeah, sure, yeah, whatever. Wait, did not realize you were 70. That question just doesn't work for you, does it? Should we just scratch that one and just move on?
It's your call, Justin.
Okay, that one's gone. You look great, by the way, so great. And you're clearly more than qualified for this job. You're actually way overqualified, and we were so impressed. You had great interviews, great video. You nailed it, Ben, congrats. You're an intern.
Hey.
right, so what you may have noticed is absolutely some differences in how we communicate, from the very formal styles to more informal. Today we're going to think about those generational work styles and motivations, where they come from and how that plays out in those interactions like we just observed, our different communication preferences of the generations, potential clash points and differences that occur, and a few strategies to improve communication between generations. When we think about it, our baby boomers they absolutely embrace digital technology. They use smartphones, social media, but they still want that opportunity for face-to-face communication when possible. Gen Xers, although not digital natives like our Millennials and Gen Zs, are just very comfortable using technology. In fact, 54% of them describe themselves as tech savvy. Millennials, of course, want organizations and want to work in places that embrace technology. They've grown up in a time where collaboration and teamwork online has been critical. So they want to embrace those cloud-based technologies in the workplace. And then our Gen Z has never known a world without technology. So they absolutely like to communicate through apps, social media, and want companies that provide a lot of devices and technology. So those are some things to just keep in mind. Who are those 5 generations? In case you're not familiar, although there are birth years that are given to the different generations, it's really important to think about those events and trends and technologies, or lack of, that shaped your way of thinking as you were growing up. You have to have a physical memory of an event for it to impact your way of thinking. So we know that our traditionalists were typically born before 1945, and under each of these boxes, you'll see different names that are given to the generations. Our baby boomers were typically born between 1946 and 1965. Our Gen Xers typically born between 1966 and 1980. Generation Y, or the Millennials, 1981 to 1995. And then Gen Z would be after 1995. The reason 1995 is so important is because the divide between Gen Z and Millennials is that you have to have a memory of 9/11. So although some Gen Zs were born before 9/11, they can't remember it. So that's the key difference in how you distinguish Millennial and Gen Z. Also, if you're born on either side of a generation by 5 years, this would be known as our cusper, and it simply means that maybe you identify and associate and resonate more with that other generation because you are so close to the edges. If you want to take a look at NC State statistics, this was pulled in September of 2019. But you can tell NC State has a spread of all the different generations. We still have folks in our traditionalist category working. Then we have our baby boomers, of course, Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Z. In the general population of the workforce, these 2 generations comprise the largest number. NC State happens to have a little bit more of a seasoned staff, but this is a breakdown of what we have on campus now. All right, so just to get you guys starting to talk and warmed up a little bit, I'm going to send you into a breakout room for 3 or 4 minutes, and you're going to discuss what do you think those significant events, trends, and technologies were that had an impact on your generation, and how do you think that shaped your way of thinking? How might that, play out in the workplace? So events and trends that impacted you and your way of thinking. And if you'll give me just a minute, it takes a minute to get the breakout room set up. All right, so you're going to have 5 minutes and you'll be given a 15-second countdown. Hi, Rebecca. They're in a waiting breakout room, and they'll be back in just a second.
Okay, thanks. I don't know why I was having trouble getting in to onto Zoom today, but
Yeah,
so
my connection's not doing the greatest either, so you're not.
Okay.
But yeah, they're coming back from their breakout rooms, and we'll keep going.
Okay, thank you.
I think everybody might be back,
All right, looks good.
Stephanie.
So we had some folks in the waiting room, so I've tried to let them in as well. So you may have some new people join you in our next breakout. So hopefully what you've been talking about are things you remember growing up, how those events or technologies or trends may have impacted your thinking. So we're going to briefly walk down the different generations. If there's something that you talked about in your group that's relevant to one of the generations we're discussing, feel free to put your comments in the chat, and we'll try to bring that into the conversation. And at a minimum, you all will be able to see what each other are talking about. So with our traditionalists, and remember we do have still in general, 2% of traditionalists are in the population as a whole working. This was the generation that grew up after the Great Depression. They were tagged the greatest generation, fought most of our wars, World War I, World War II, all of those patriotic symbolism for this group. Obviously, very little technology. News was communicated through the radio. I've been thinking during this pandemic what it would have been like to have had this pandemic without technology. And I'm so grateful that we're able to connect and still continue in some ways. But at this point in time, obviously that would not have been an issue. The workplace, this was the generation that was able to have a lot of longevity with companies, worked for many, many years, retired with a gold watch. Definitely very different place than what we have now. Our baby boomers, as we mentioned earlier, grew up during that time of Vietnam, the first moon landing, protests, the assassination of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., the workplace. Baby boomers obviously created a lot of the technology that we have today. Lots of paper and file and rotary phones and typewriters and that kind. So all of these events and the way that we were brought up in our workplaces shapes what might be important to us now in the workplace. With our Generation X, this is by far the smallest generation globally. They are sandwiched between the two largest generations, the Millennials and the Boomers. So they're often called the lost generation. This generation was the first generation to start experiencing staying at home as a child. So the little boy there with the key represents a latchkey child. So Gen Xers have grown up to be very independent. They got off the school bus, and unlike previous generations, there was no one home to take care of them. So they became very resourceful, very independent. They were the first generations who have computers and internet in the workplace during their early career days. First generation to start experiencing divided homes, daycare, and those types of things. So for their work styles, they're very independent. They like autonomy. They want not the rigid work structures that some of the previous generations really valued. Our millennials certainly grew up in a very different time, much more diverse workplace, much more technology available. They were also tagged as the trophy generation, participation ribbons, violence, lots of the 9/11. So all of that led to what was termed the helicopter parent. Millennials were the first generation to be involved with family decision-making. Previous generations were told what to do, where to go, what to eat. This generation had a lot of negotiation power. So our upbringing influences our work style as well, because with millennials and with Gen Zs, they really want to be involved and collaborate and be a part of that decision making, because that is how it was for them growing up. Our Gen Zs we're still learning about, but this would be the group now entering the workplace. They have seen a lot in their lifetime as well in terms of the first Great Recession, and now, of course, with this pandemic, this will be one of their defining moments in how they think. Even before the pandemic, there were a lot of researchers who thought this generation would maybe be like their great-grandparents, the traditionalists, because they had grown up during the first financial crash. They watched their parents get laid off potentially, the foreclosures, all of those things. So there were predictions even before now that this generation may be more thrifty. Their buying habits, savings habits, all of those things might be influenced. And now we can certainly assume that. This generation's also had a huge influence on their thinking due to social media. Their lives have been social and publicized. They've always had technology. And so these are the types of things that also shape what they bring to work. And I know in your groups, you probably talked about a lot of things, and I hope you'll have a chance to respond in the chat. But I'm going to show you another quick video that really gets into the heart of these differences that can come out in the workplace. See if any of this resonates with you.
Hi, I'm a baby boomer.
And I'm Generation Y.
I like to show dedication to my employer by working really long hours.
I don't really feel like I need to work long hours as long as I get my work done.
I'm excited when my workday starts.
I'm excited when my workday ends.
I like to have meetings in person.
I prefer email or voicemail.
I've worked hard to climb the corporate ladder.
I should already be at the top of the ladder. I mean, I have a degree.
I put in 60 hours at the office last week.
I'm taking next month off to go hiking in Malaysia.
I have a sense of entitlement.
Oh, so do I.
Hey. I like Maxwell House.
Oh, I prefer Starbucks.
I just got a Facebook account.
Oh, Facebook. Good for you. That is so 2009.
I like competition.
I prefer collaboration.
I've heard of that.
Oh, now he doesn't know this, but I plan on getting his job when he retires.
She doesn't know this, but I'm never going to retire. Now, come on. We really need to work at getting along.
See, there you go with work again.
That's what I'm saying. You have no work ethic.
Well, that's because to you, working a half day means you leave at 5. You know what? You're right. We do need to try to get along.
That's what I think.
Okay, well, why don't we focus on what we admire about each other?
Great.
Well, if you think about it, your generation invented a lot of the technology we use.
Yes, but for you, it just seems to come so easily.
Well, only because we're practically playing video games in our cribs.
Yes, that's true. You did have a different upbringing, though. My parents are still married to each other. Yes, self-esteem. We thought that was very important, so we tried to pump your generation full of it, which is why for everything you got a participation ribbon.
You know, we could use a little more of that here at work. I mean, does anybody ever say, hey, thanks for coming to work on time. Good job getting your work done. No, it's just like it's expected or something.
It is by those of us with a work ethic.
There you go again.
Hi, I'm a baby boomer.
And I'm Generation Y.
And we're Generation X, and we're stuck in the middle of all of this.
All right, so I hope you found that entertaining, but also somewhat true. So I'm going to send you back into your breakout rooms. This time I'd like for you to briefly discuss, what does your generation value and how would you describe your work ethic? This question is always very interesting because how we define work ethic and some of the respectful behaviors can be very different. Neither is right or wrong, but it's always great to get each other's perspective to help you understand how to better communicate with generations, because our values often drive those behaviors and what's really important. So what does your generation value and how would you describe your work ethic? So I'm going to open the rooms again. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you had some,
Stephanie, I think we're.
I'm sorry, Janine? Janine, were you trying to say something?
Oh, I was just saying, I think we're good.
Okay, great.
I was just saying that
All right, so during your conversations, you may have come across some of the things I'm about to share you, but according to some of the research was done when asked that very question, these are the responses that were given from the different generations. With traditionalists, they certainly value rules, structure, dedication, honor, expect others to behave responsibly, very patriotic. With our baby boomers, they're very loyal to the team, follow the rules mentality, value hard work and ambition, goal-oriented, very much want respect from younger workers, and believe that seniority is what gives promotions. Generation X values balance over advancement. They want to work smarter, not longer. They have more of a break the rules mentality, very outcome oriented, results driven, value autonomy, and can move easily between jobs. Millennials are very driven to grow. They value education, diversity, technology, informality and fun, collaborative, flexible work hours, meaningful work. They're also very entrepreneurial and also move easily between jobs. So some of that might resonate with you. Some of those things may have come up in your conversations as well. Okay, I have one more set of questions and one more breakout, and I do hope you're finding the breakouts helpful. So for our next conversation, what do you think your greatest attributes are in the workplace, and where might you struggle or have problems? So strengths and weaknesses basically of your generation. So share a few of those, and then we'll go over some more specific communication information. So I'm going to open the last room now. Okay, welcome back again. I'm going to move us on. Please keep in mind we're about to share more of the general statements. So even though it's important that we treat everyone as an individual and not stereotype them based on their generation, there are some general differences to keep in mind. And probably in your conversations, you've been hearing some of those themes. So again, I'll just share with you some of what other generations have shared when asked those very questions. So when it comes to attributes, our traditionalists are very hardworking, stable, loyal, thorough, detail-oriented. They have a lot of information about our history, and so they love, love, love to be interns and share their stories and help with that. And I meant to say mentors. I was thinking about the intern movie. Our baby boomers, also very hardworking. They created the word workaholics. They're very anxious to please, great team players, ambitious, will go the extra mile, also very experienced, knowledgeable, and dedicated. Gen X adapts well to change, very eager to learn, determined, highly educated, thrive on flexibility, independent, self-starters. Our millennials, great with multitasking, very technology savvy, optimistic, team-oriented, highly educated. They're not concerned with failure. They see it as a learning opportunity, so they're much more likely to just jump in and try something, and very interested in improving processes. When it comes to struggles, either with other generations or things that might be an area for development or even a misperception of another generation, our traditionalists are going to let you know when they disagree, so sometimes smiling through the problems. They're not going to buck the system, not as comfortable with conflict or technology and change. Our boomers can sometimes be competitive, want too many meetings and committees, put process before results. They desire respect from younger workers and that formal chain of command for communication. Gen X dislikes authority and micromanagers. They don't prefer the rigid work requirements and structures, can be seen as impatient, skeptical, cynical. They mistrust institutions and can sometimes have a big gap with the generations prior to them. Millennials have been known by other generations to have an entitlement attitude. Whether that's true or not, that's the misperception that can sometimes happen. That comes from what other generations might view as informality, respectful communication, and they have a challenge of managing older people now. Our millennials by far are going to be the largest generation in the workplace, and so their new challenge is how to manage people older. And for older people, it's taking orders, if you will, from someone younger, because that's not how some of our previous generations were brought up in the workplace prior to now. Okay, so some of that may have come up in your conversation. Again, those are just some of the general attributes that come from some of the research. Flashpoints, as you can imagine, differences can occur when we view things differently, when we value certain areas of our workplace. There was a book written many years ago called When Generations Collide, but their research was great because it really pinpointed where some of these flashpoints can be in regards to these different categories. So with career goals, traditionalists were able to build a legacy. Baby boomers had a stellar career. Gen Xers wanted a portable career, and millennials have parallel careers. So when we think about what the goal was for our careers, it looks very different. The way we think about rewards can also be different. And this is important because recognition and rewards is certainly an engagement driver in the workplace. So our traditionalists were happy with just knowing they had done a good job. They didn't need a lot of that recognition. Boomers are more driven by money, title, the corner office, so to speak. Gen Xers really wanted that freedom, the ability to telework and those types of things. and millennials, work that has meaning for them, really wanting to make a difference. Feedback, 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 very important for work culture. Our traditionalists, however, assumed that no news is good news because feedback wasn't given. Baby boomers were the ones who loved the feedback once a year with lots of documentation. Gen Xers wanted to know sooner than later. And millennials want feedback at the push of a button, so that constant stream of feedback. When it comes to training and education, traditionalists, I learned it the hard way, so can you. Baby boomers, we train them too much, they might leave. Gen Xers, nope, the more they learn, the more they stay. And millennials, continuous learning is a way of life. Communication, traditionalists, write me the formal memos, one-on-ones. Baby boomers, call me, meetings, meetings, meetings. Gen Xers, email me, leave me alone. And millennials, text me, post your status. So, obviously we have a lot of differences in what we expect, what we value, and we need to think about how then do we improve our communication between the generations. So, what's really important is to set expectations regarding workplace culture and behavior. A lot of times we just don't know what we don't know. As we've learned, some of the previous generations obviously entered the workplace wearing suits and ties. Computers didn't exist, there wasn't email. And then fast forward to now, we have generations entering the workplace with smartphones. They're very comfortable to communicate virtually from anywhere. It's second nature for some of us to have our phones in a meeting, responding to different notifications, while other generations might see that as very disrespectful behavior. So that's why it's just really important for teams to sit down and think about, so what are those expectations? How are we going to operate and communicate together so that we're all on the same page and don't assume? It's also important to use different types of communication. We all have our preferences. Baby boomers sometimes prefer that face-to-face conversation, so we need to make time for those one-on-ones and meetings. Gen Xers would like to speak on the phone or email or text. If you're not used to using one of those methods, then we need to adapt when we're working with that generation. Or we might need to be sure we offer the ability to have video conferencing, conference calls, collaboration tools, and obviously we're all getting very good with those methods. But mixing our communication is really important, and thinking about who prefers it, how and where and when and what can be very helpful in improving our communication. Understanding the differences in values and motivations. Hopefully you had a lot of great conversations in your breakouts to help you understand where people are coming from, what motivates them. So I'm not going to speak much more about that, but just keep those conversations in mind. Another way to improve communication between generations is to simply, don't assume. We know what assuming can do. But if we ask people what they expect and what some of their, what they mean, instead of assuming or stereotyping. For example, you always hear, oh, a traditionalist has no idea how to use, a phone or whatever, and that's absolutely not true. Same is true. A millennial or Gen Z may not be technically savvy. We just assume that. So it's important to ask, not assume. Remove barriers to communication. Make sure that our environments allow for communication. Right now we're working in a virtual world, so obviously communication is a lot of Zoom and phone calls and texts and email. When we do move back to the workplace, keeping in mind how to maybe remove physical barriers, for example, in ways that we communicate. So having the right mix of space, whether that's large meeting rooms, huddle areas, collaboration boards, all of those things can help to improve communication. Be willing to teach and be taught. Every generation has something to learn from one another. So we should leverage those strengths and those skills that each generation brings to the table. Hopefully you heard some of that in your conversation earlier with attributes for each generation. Make sure to acknowledge the differences. Sometimes we might want to just turn our head and not acknowledge. Instead, let's embrace that. Let's use encouraging words on our teams. Figure out how to, again, leverage those strengths, and then personalize your approach. Making sure that we are addressing and adapting to whoever that person is and how we communicate with them. And sometimes it's not just generation, as we know, there's also other things to consider, like personality and those types of things. But these would be some of the basic things you can do to improve communication between generations. Social media by generations. Janine found some great information. So Janine, would you like to talk about any of this for a few minutes?
Yeah, happy to. So by and far, Facebook remains the most used social media platform by groups of any age, but that doesn't mean that's necessarily their preferred platform. And the top Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Snapchat were regularly referred to as the most used, but I know TikTok has been in a lot of conversations as of late, so I wanted to include that information. With our younger generations, YouTube is really preferred. That is a place where they will spend a lot of their time. And also, Generation Z dedicates more time to one platform than some of the middle generations. Millennials and Gen Xers typically dabble in a variety of platforms rather than stick to one particular platform. And in this chart, you'll see that I included the word some and then preferred, and then also there are some that are blank because their use is just so small that it wasn't really helpful to include. But in the traditionalist category, they are using YouTube and Facebook. And that may be something that I wouldn't have necessarily thought of YouTube as being something that the traditionalist group would have geared themselves towards, but they do. So this is a little bit more on the next slide. There are resources that you can spend a lot of time learning more about how the different platforms are used. But in essence, this could be its own training, and we may do something on it later in the year. Stephanie, would you go back to the previous slide?
Sure.
Thank you. So again, in terms of the YouTube, while it wasn't in the top 3 for the percentage of users, like Facebook has the most amount of users. Twitter and is second. Instagram is third, but YouTube, the people that are using YouTube, their time that they spend on it is more than an hour a day, if it's their preferred channel. And so that's something when we are considering marketing to students or communicating with our students, that may be a platform we want to focus on to include making sure we are giving them information in a space that they are using. Again, like the TikTok percentages, those are even a number of people who are using TikTok is much, much smaller than some of these other channels. But this is saying if you are trying to reach people in this younger age generation, this may be a great place to find them.
All right, that is great information to have. I know in our world, we use a lot of YouTube for learning how to do things and sharing information. So I personally love YouTube. So please remember, we just want to create an environment where all generations feel valued and appreciated. Hopefully some of the tips and discussions that we've had today can help to make sure everyone feels welcome. Again, we don't want to ever stereotype a generation, but there are some general descriptions and general thoughts and ideas that we can leverage, but certainly leverage those strengths of all the generations. I have one last video to end us with. This is a nice way to have a laugh, one last laugh for the session.
Yep, true story. So our own behavior and our old behavior and behavior we don't understand takes up a lot of free rent in our heads. We have this idea that everybody has a different agenda. I mean, how many people here are under 30? That's how you can tell. Whoa! Who's over 30? Who's over 40? Who's over 50? Who's over 60? Who's just flat old? Who's flat old? Just yes. Older and younger people. Well, there are some issues there, aren't there? Older and younger people. What do older people think about younger people? Work ethic. Why is it people under 30 will quit their job to go on a ski trip? I'm sorry, you mean you want me to work late, like now late? When my friends are going skiing, job or ski? Yeah. And we think it's a work ethic. And so what do people say? I'm 45 years old and I'm old enough to have had a day. We say back in our day. Back in our day, we ate dirt and we liked it. We ate dirt, handfuls of dirt. We walked to school uphill both ways in the snow in Florida. Important. You know, we had no shoes, we had no feet. We just walked on our nubs. We had nothing in my day. Didn't even have feet back in those days. Right? And what do the young people say about us? An employee told me this at my company, 25 years old. Mr. Wynn, the reason that your computer crashes is because you're old. She also said, you know, I'm in a hurry, Mr. Wynn. I need the answer. I don't need the history of the answer. Yeah. But what happens to us if you're over 40 years old, you're on the computer, you're going, okay, having a little bit of a problem. Oh. And you start looking for young people. Yes, that's what I do. We need each other. And old people, remember that these young people are not living in our times. We are living in theirs. Important. We work together, love each other.
Right. So I always love that video because it's just a great reminder that we do need each other. Every generation is very valuable. There are certainly things we can leverage in terms of our strengths. Communication is critical in our workplace. And so understanding each other's perspectives, where we're coming from, our values, our motivations, our communication preferences, all of those things can really go a long way in collaborating and communicating across generations. We have just about 2 to 3 minutes before it's time to end. So we can try to take some questions if anyone has any, or if you want to unmute yourself, if you have a comment or a thought you'd like to share. We do have a couple of minutes left for that.
Stephanie, Peggy had a question about, Virginia had a question about the title of that last video.
I'm going to be sharing this slide deck as soon as we're done, and Janine can send it out. The links are embedded. I'm trying to remember, and right off the top of my head, I can't remember it. It was a YouTube one though, but they will be in the slide deck if that's okay.
So feel free to keep asking questions if they come up, but can we all give Stephanie a warm round of applause? And in terms of the logistics relating to this, the resources from the session, once we've pulled down the video from, because it takes some amount of time, sometimes a short amount of time, sometimes a longer amount of time to get the recording. I will have the slides and the recording and also a feedback survey for you all, and I'll send it to your emails. And if you would please submit a response to the feedback survey, that would be great, so that we can use that information to organize and improve future trainings.
Well, I appreciate everyone's time today. I know Zoom is a little bit challenging with doing these conversations, but I do hope you enjoyed having some breakout time with your colleagues. And learning and organizational development is going to be having more short sessions this summer, so we'll be sending out information soon as well if you would like to participate in more of our dialogues. So thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you, Stephanie, for keeping it so tight. It's easy to have these sessions go on longer. And also everyone, on June 25th, our next CALS Comm workshop is at the same time on Thursday at 10 a.m. on Thursday the 25th. We'll focus on campus communication resources, and we'll be hearing from Sherry O'Neill and Susan Standard. So thanks to all. Have a great day.